standard 3, which is one more standard. And it's your favorite topic. Students, right? Isn't that your favorite? All right, I know that lunch was good, but we got to get started. All right, so let's start talking about standard 3, which is all about your students. All right, student policies and services support the achievement of the end of program student learning outcomes, the program outcomes, and the role-specific competencies if you have a graduate program. So standard 3 is all about the support services that are available for your students and your student policies. So criterion 3.1 is that the nursing program's current ACEN accreditation status and contact information is accurate and readily accessible to the public. So programs are required to accurately disclose their accreditation status. Okay, you all don't mess this one up. Okay, so what you want to do is ensure the information is correct and consistent in all locations. So you need to find out where all this information is located. Is it on your website? Is it in your handbook, in your manuals? Where all do you have this information? The more places you put stuff, sometimes the harder it is to track it down, or you think you've corrected it in all locations and maybe you haven't. So figure out where all your accreditation status is located and then make sure that it's accurate. Now, if it's been 8 years since you had a site visit, you might need to check the ACEN address because the office moved a couple years ago or a few years ago, just down the street, but the address changed. So you want to make sure that you've updated that to the accurate address. So again, make sure it's correct in all locations. You also want to make sure that it's written, that disclosure statement is written in accordance with policy number 9. For those of you that have accredited programs already, look at policy number 9 and it will give you the exact wording. You see what I mean? You can't mess this one up. All you got to do is plug in your program name, your program type, and then your most recent accreditation status. So make sure that you look at policy number 9. Now, for those of you that are in candidacy, you will look at policy number 34 to see what's written in your disclosure statement. So there's a little difference there. So number 9, if you're already accredited, number 34, if you are in candidacy. All right, so when you're writing your narrative, what you want to do is point your readers to where and how the accreditation status and contact information is made available to the public. So if that's on your website, provide a link. Please make sure the link works. Okay, so provide a link to where it's located on your website. If it's in your handbook, that's great, that's fine, but tell your readers exactly where. Is it on page 9? Is it on page 2? Where do they find that information? And then on site, actually before the site visit team gets there, they're gonna, if you say it's on your website, they're gonna look at your website and see if they can verify that before they even get there. If it's in your handbook, they're gonna look in your handbook before they get there, all right? So if you got a volunteer to write to a particular criterion, volunteer for 3.1, okay? All right, let's talk about criterion 3.2, because it's a little more complex. All right, so in criterion 3.2 is where you're gonna talk about your student policies. So the following nursing program or governing organization policies are publicly accessible, current, non-discriminatory, and implemented as published. Justification is provided when the policies differ from the governing organization. Okay, that's kind of a mouthful, but I know that in your programs, you probably have hundreds of policies. Maybe not hundreds, but you have a lot of policies, right? It feels like 100 sometimes. But in your narrative in 3.2, you want to address these 5 specific policies. Okay, so let's look at 3.2a, your admissions policy. Is it publicly accessible? Is what's published, is it current? Is it non-discriminatory and implemented as published? What does that mean? If I want to come to your nursing program or apply to your nursing program, where do I find that admission criteria? Is it on the website? It doesn't have to be on the website. It's just easier to put public things that have to be publicly accessible on the website. Maybe it's in your handbook. Where's it located? Tell me where it's located. Is it accurate? And is it non-discriminatory and implemented as published? What that means is, does it apply to everybody? Does the same admission criteria apply to everybody? So some of you may be from states where your state regulatory agency sets your minimum admission requirements. Some states not, but some you may have that set by your regulatory agency. So you need to know if you have any of those or not. But common admission requirements are a certain GPA requirement. Some of you may have placement tests. Some of you may have prerequisite courses that have to be completed. That's where you want to explain what is required for your students to be admitted. Maybe you have healthcare requirements. They have to have CPR, have to have a background check. that sort of thing. So what is required to be admitted into your nursing program, and how would I know that if I wanted to apply? All right, in 3.2b is where you'll talk about your progression requirements. So now that I'm in your program, how do I get from first semester to second semester to third semester to fourth? What does it take to progress? Do you have a GPA requirement? Do I have to pass theory, certain skills check off, clinical? Do I have to pass all components, or what is required for me to progress? And I want to stop right here for a second and talk about high stakes testing. Are you using high stakes testing, and are you using it as a requirement to progress? And I will pull graduation in here for a second. And I'm going to put up the definition of high stakes testing, and then we'll come back and talk about the rest of the policies. But this is the ACEN glossary definition of high stakes testing. A single test or exam to determine an important outcome, such as passing a course or graduating. It's not a best practice, okay? And third-party testing products should only be used for the purposes they are intended. A lot of you will ask, is a skills check off, is a dosage calculation test a high stakes testing? ACEN does not consider those to be high stakes testing, even though many of you probably have a requirement that they have to pass. Maybe you give them 3 opportunities, but the ACEN does not consider those high stakes. We consider that a patient safety concern. However, if I am in your program, I met all the admission requirements, I have a 95 average, and my clinical instructors have told me how great I am every semester. And now I have to take a certain test that you've never laid eyes on and make X number points or whatever on it. And I missed that by 5 points. And now you tell me I can't progress or I can't graduate. That's a high stakes test. Even if you let me remediate and take that test again, you still consider that a high stakes exam, okay? Most of you are not using high stakes testing. It's a very small percentage of our programs, and that's something that's reported on the annual report. So it's a very small percentage of our programs that are using high stakes exams. So chances are, very few of you in this room are using high stakes exam. If you're using standardized testing, it's fine. Look, they're great products out there. Just how are you using those? You want to make sure you're using them in appropriate ways. High stakes testing is one of our, so you know that we accept complaints just like you all have complaint policies. We do too. And one of our largest number of complaints is related to high stakes testing. We've had so many complaints that the Board of Commissioners has tasked us with developing a policy regarding high stakes testing. We don't have a policy about it right now, but now we have to. Some of you are from states that have high stakes testing policies. So we will be developing that policy, so look for that. Remember, when we have a policy, it'll be open for public comment, so you all are welcome to comment when that comes out. I don't know when that'll happen. It may be late this summer, early fall. It may be in 2 weeks. I really don't know when that policy is going to be developed and placed out for review. So, we okay with high stakes testing? There are 2 links down here at the bottom on our website. You will find an article about, or a position statement about high stakes testing, and then you will see also an addendum to high stakes testing, because we had a lot of questions about it. Okay, so I encourage you, don't read them right now, but later go back and read those 2 resources, and then I encourage you all to comment when the policy comes open for public comment. Go on the website and comment. All right, and then graduation. What's required to graduate from your program? Do I have to have a certain number of credits? Do I have to, again, pass certain clinical skills or lab skills? Are you using high stakes testing? Maybe you're not using high stakes testing, or you're using standardized testing, and maybe they have to take the test and remediate. They may not have to get a certain score, but how are you using it? Just explain what's required for me. I've been in your program, I've passed all my semesters, I'm about to graduate, what's required? All right, and then in 3.2D, that's where you're going to talk about your formal complaints and grievances procedure. Many times what I see is nursing programs use the policy of your governing organization. You don't have to have a separate policy. You know, you see at the top where under 3.2 where it says the following nursing program or governing organization policies. So it's okay if you use the same one as your college or university. Okay, but what is your procedure? The students know where the formal complaint and grievances, they usually find it though, right? But where is that located? But I want to point out the word formal, okay? A lot of programs ask, what is considered a formal complaint? You define it. You define what a formal complaint is, and it varies institution to institution, okay? Students, I know they complain about the temperature in the room, the wall color, the toilet paper, the clinical uniform, they complain, I know, I get it, but what's a formal complaint? Okay, all right, and then E, 3.2E is about your technology requirement. We talked in Standard 4 yesterday about how students use technology, and we talked about healthcare technology. Well, how do students know what's required of them? Do you let them know before they're admitted that they need a certain type of device or certain technology? Maybe they need a laptop with a camera or something like that. How do they know? Again, this may be at the institution level. Your college may have, or university may have a technology requirement policy, but somehow we've got to let students know what they're expected to have. I've visited programs before where the university or college will give the students the device they need. Not everybody can do that. But if you give the students everything they need, then you just need to explain that. All right, so in your narrative, first thing you want to do is confirm all your policies are publicly accessible. And then you want to make sure that they're consistent, that they're consistently documented. Where all do you have these policies located? Maybe they're on your website, your handbooks, some of them may be in your core syllabi. Where are they located? Make sure they're all, if I'm looking for them, I can see the same thing, same policies in all the different areas, so I don't see differences. And then you want to identify and describe, again, the current nursing policies and procedures. You see identified, underlined. Don't go off on the rabbit hole talking about policies we didn't ask you about. Okay, stick to those policies. And then describe how they're non-discriminatory and implemented as published. Okay, do they apply to everybody? Does everybody have to have a 3.0 to be admitted? Does everybody have to have the same prereqs? Does everybody have to have a background check? And then implemented as published. When I'm on site and I review your student records, am I going to see that everybody has a 3.0? That everybody took anatomy and physiology and microbiology and whatever else prereqs were required? And then that last bullet, you want to provide a rationale for any policy that's different than that of your governing organization. Nurses are special, right? We have special policies. Why do we have special policies? Or why are our policies different? We're going to explain that. Guess how we're going to explain that? In the table. All right, so let's look at this table. So you can see the admission policies here. We have admission requirements and background checks. You can see our governing organization has an open admissions policy. Could we do that in the nursing program? Well, we could, but we just talked about Standard 5, right? All right. But for our nursing courses, or for our nursing program, we have a GPA of 3.0 or higher. Why is that? Provide the rationale for your differences. Well, nursing programs are pretty rigorous, right? So see how easy it is in the table. You don't have to go super in depth for your differences. Now, you might want to, but you can she'll keep it short and sweet, the differences. And then the background checks. Most nursing programs require background checks. Why do we require those? Because our clinical agencies require those. Very easy to explain that difference, but you want to provide the rationale for the difference. Look at the progression policy. Not very common, not uncommon for a nursing program's progression policy to differ. And you just explain the difference over there because of program rigor and licensure requirements. Some of your policies may not differ. Like I said, a lot of places use the same technology requirements or use the same formal complaints or grievances policy. So you may not have a difference in those policies, and you would just state that. All right, so let's go back and look at this side. These are some examples of supporting evidence. Again, where are your policies located? They're in your handbook, point your reader to where they're located. If they're on the website, point your reader to where they're located. If you have any state rules and regulations for these policies, you want to include that. So if your Board of Nursing has admission requirements, or sometimes they have minimum admission requirements, some of you that won't apply, but if you do have those, you want to make sure to include those. And then your student records. On site, your peers are going to look at student records. They'll look at 10% or 10, whichever is greater. So you have 8 students, they're going to look at all 8. If you have 800 students, guess what? They're going to look at a percentage, and they usually randomly sample. So the first day, they may ask you for your class rosters, and they may just pick 5 students out of each class, just really random, to look at those student files. You'll work with your team chair about working on the agenda because you want to have the appropriate amount of time. It's obviously not going to take me that long to look at 8 student records, but if I got to look at 80, I'm going to need a little more time on the agenda, right? So you'll work that out with the team chair as you start to plan your agenda for the site visit. Your core syllabi will also be a requirement. They're going to be in the repository already for Standard 4, but your peers are going to be looking at your syllabi to see if your policies are there. And then they're going to interview students. And in the student interview, they're going to ask them about the admission policies. They feel like they were consistently implemented. They will ask about technology. How did they know what type of technology they needed for the program? They'll ask, do they know how to file a formal complaint? Do they know the process? All right, criterion 3.3. The governing organization or nursing program records for resolution of formal complaints or formal grievances include evidence of A, due process, and B, timely resolution in accordance with the governing organization or nursing program policies or procedures. All right, in 3.2, that's where you told me about the policy. In 3.3, that's where you're going to tell me how your students receive due process and timely resolution. Okay? All right, so what does timely resolution mean? Timely resolution in accordance with governing organization or nursing program policies and procedures. What does your policy say? If your policy says that a complaint will be acknowledged in 2 business days and will receive a response within 14 business days, that's your policy. But if I look at your records and I see that that student didn't get a response for 90 days, and that one is yet to get a response, and that complaint was filed 6 months ago, that's not timely resolution, okay? So your policy dictates what timely resolution is. We don't tell you what timely resolution is. We're just looking to see if you're following your own policies and procedures of your governing organization or your program. With me? All right, so in your narrative, you want to summarize the formal complaints and grievances since the last accreditation visit, okay? This is the only thing that we require 8 years worth of evidence for, okay? So since the last ACEN accreditation visit. You have a question?
There we go. Our formal grievance policy is our college's formal grievance policy, and it changed like last year, and we're just now, like, this is our first year of data collection, but I know we have to give the information for the whole 8 years. Do we need to explain how the policy changed, or just explain what the current policy is? Like, because some are gonna be under the old policy and some under the new if you're looking at all 8 years.
What's the answer to all nursing questions?
Depends.
Depends. No, you do need to talk about your current policies. We're looking at things at the time of the visit. And I say depends because we want 8 years worth of complaints. So if you have 25 that happened under that old policy, you might want to explain that and that the policy changed.
Okay, so just like summary of the old policy. These were under the old policy.
Yeah, yes. Was it like a significant change or just a little minor?
I mean, it was a change in whether...
In the process?
Whether a student gets a hearing or not, like how that was decided.
Okay, yeah, you might need to explain both in your narrative there. All right, good question. All right, so since the last accreditation... Oh, I'm sorry.
I knew you would make me get a mic, so I just got ready. My question is, so our HR person is our Title IX representative, so it won't be in our student files, which are like in health science. So
yeah.
do you...
That's okay. You'll just explain who has those records, and then on site, the site visit team will need a time on the agenda to visit with
HR.
Yeah, and whoever's writing to the standard needs to go visit them and just see how many complaints you've had, because when you write your narrative, you want to explain a little bit about that. And we're about to talk about summarizing your complaints.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right, so again, you want a summary of your formal complaints. So let's say that you've had 0. Just state that. Maybe you've had 5 in the last 8 years. And again, we're talking about formal complaints. They followed your formal complaint and grievance process, okay? So let's say you've had 5. Well, you can summarize and say 3 of those related to grades, and 2 of them were related to clinical issues, whatever they were related. But just kind of general summarize what they were about. Maybe you've had 80. 60 of those were grades. 20 of those were related to high stakes testing. And we changed our policy based on that, okay? All right, so just kind of summarize your complaints, and then on site, your peers are going to look at your records to just to see if the students got due process and that you followed your policies. Okay, so your supporting evidence is going to be any formal complaints or grievance documents or records, and those are kept in various different ways. Some people keep an Excel spreadsheet. Some people keep them in the student files. Some places they're kept separate. Some places, depending on what the complaint is about, they're kept in different places. If it's a faculty complaint, they may be kept in HR. If it's a grade complaint, it may be kept over in student services. You explain what it's like at your program and who keeps these records, how they're kept, how they're separated, because it varies greatly institution to institution, okay? And then you want any documentation verifying that the policy was followed. It's typically kept with the record. And then evidence of resolution within the established time frame. So if you said that they will get resolution within 30 days, did they? Resolution does not mean they got what they wanted. Okay? That's not what that means. Because a lot of times they don't get. They want to pass, right? And a lot of times they just can't do that. All right, and then interviews with students and administrators. So if the site visit team, they're going to talk to students and ask them about, do they know how to file a complaint? Do they know if they had a complaint, do they receive due process? But then they're going to talk to administrators. So these files are kept with HR, and they ask them the policy. How are you following the policy? They're going to look for documentation there within the records. All right, you have an exercise in your handout on page 13. If you'll take a few minutes and complete that activity, it's on 3.2 and 3.3, maybe about 5 minutes. All right. How'd you do? Were you able to locate your policies? Still looking for your policies? All right, let's come back together and finish up standard 3. All right, criterion 3.4. Criterion 3.4 is all about your student records, and that they are maintained, or student records are maintained by the nursing program, are kept secure, and are in compliance with applicable policies and procedures of the governing organization and regulatory agencies. So folks ask all the time, what's supposed to be in our student records? You tell us. We don't tell you what should be kept in your student records. You tell us what you keep in your student records. Okay? Some of you may have regulatory agency requirements that say what should be kept, transcripts, admission documentation, that sort of thing. Some of you have a governing organization, or probably all of you have a governing organization policy for record maintenance. You need to find out what that is and make sure that your records are kept in compliance. Some of you are probably keeping electronic records now. You may be 100% electronic. Some of you have a mixture. These things are kept electronically. These things are kept in paper. And that's okay. But you decide what's in your records. You're going to tell us what the policy is and how you follow those policies. All right, so in your narrative, you want to identify what nursing records are maintained by the nursing program. It's usually admission documents, transcripts, sometimes complaints are kept in the record, sometimes skills checkoffs are kept in the records, sometimes your health requirements are a part of your student records. It varies institution to institution, but you identify what's kept in your student records. And then you describe how they're stored securely. If they are paper copies, maybe they're kept in the nurse administrator's office or an administrative assistant's office or something like that in a locked file cabinet. And then the door to that is locked, so maybe they're double locked, okay? You explain how they're kept securely. Who has the key if they're locked up? Okay, so you identify who has access to the records. If they're stored electronically, who has electronic access? Is it password protected? Only 2 people have the access? You tell what happens at your program, okay? And then again, who has access to the records? So your supporting evidence would be any policies. Your policies for record maintenance, again, maybe they're at the governing organization level, they may be at the program level. And then you may have regulatory agency policies as well. So you may have 3 different policies that you're following there. All right, and then on site, again, your peers, the site visit team, they're gonna look at the student records. And that's something they're gonna ask, who has access to this. So whether you pull it up on the computer and show them the electronic records, they're gonna ask who has access to this. Or if they're locked in a file cabinet somewhere, they're gonna ask that. They're gonna verify that during the visit. All right, criterion 3.5 is about changes. When you have changes in your policies and procedures, are those clearly and consistently communicated to students in an effective and timely manner? Changes happen. Sometimes they change at the program level. Sometimes your Board of Nursing has changes. Sometimes your healthcare agencies change things, and which causes you to have to change things. But changes happen. When they happen, how do you communicate those changes to students? Do you give them time to adjust? So in your narrative, you want to describe, how do you let students know when changes happen? For example, if you change your med-surg textbook, how are you going to let your students know? If you change your clinical start time, how do you let your students know? Or you change the uniform, how do you let students know? And then you want to give examples of timely communication. So it wouldn't be fair, what is today, Wednesday? It wouldn't be fair to me to walk into class on a Wednesday and tell the students, well, you need new uniforms by Friday. That wouldn't be fair, would it? But if I know I'm changing the uniform policy for the fall, and I sent out an announcement now or communicated somehow to students that I'm going to change the uniforms for the fall, that's timely communication, right? I give them time to adjust. So in your narrative, again, you want to describe how you let students know about changes and give an example. You've probably changed something. Maybe it was something that seems small to you, but may not be so small to a student. Or maybe you changed something large, like your third-party vendor that you use or something like that. How did you communicate that to students? So give an example there in your narrative. During the student interviews, they're going to ask them about changes. And how did you know about these changes? How are they communicated to you? Usually what I find is that you're communicating in various methods. You're telling them in the classroom when you have face-to-face. You're posting it on your LMS, and you may be emailing the students. So for the most part, you all do a great job of communicating change to your students. Okay? All right, so give some examples of how you do that. And if you have any policies or procedures, if you have a policy about how you communicate change, you would want to include that as well. You may not have a policy for that, but if you do, you would want to include it. All All right, and then in 3.6, this is where you're going to talk about your student support services. How are they commensurate with the needs of the nursing students, regardless of their location, method of delivery, or program option? So what that means is, are all your students on all your campuses, do they all have access to the same student support services? Do your online students have the same access to support services that your in-person students do? And then depending on their program option, do all program options have the same access? Now look, you may have campuses, you may have a main campus that you may call it, and then you may have several branch campuses or students in different places. You don't necessarily have to have a library on every one of those campuses, but do they all have the same access to the library? Can those students on those other campuses use the main campus library? Do they all have virtual access to the library? Okay. And you can see an example of student support services here: advisors, counseling, tutoring, library services, learning centers, technology, health services. You may think of some others that you have available to students, and you may or may not have every one of these. These are not required. These are just some examples of student services. So if you have counseling services that are available to your students, are they available to all your students on all your campuses in all your program options? Are they available to your virtual students as well as your in-person students? You may have like a financial aid counselor or a tutor that maybe is on this campus on Monday and Tuesday, this campus on Wednesday and Thursday, and this one's on Friday. It may rotate around so that students have the opportunity for in-person, or maybe they're available for virtual services as well. So you explain what services you have and how they're available to all your students. All right, so in your narrative, again, you want to describe your student services. So include them all. This is a chance to really brag on yourself, because I see some of you have some wonderful support services for your students. So list them all and give a brief description of what services they provide. You may use a certain title for something, and your site visitors may not know what that means. And I can't think of an example right off the top of my head, but they may not know what it means. So explain the service that they provide. You may have a fancy name for counselor or for advisor, so you want to include the description. And you know what works really well here? A table. I know that surprises you, but you could do a table and list your student service that's available and then how they support your students in the next column. Okay, makes it real easy, and you can list them all out. All right, and then you do want to include in your narrative how they're available or how everyone has access to the services. Again, it's not expected that you have counselors on every campus. It's great if you do, but if you don't, explain how they still meet all your students' needs, or every student has equal access. Your supporting evidence are going to be your catalogs, your handbooks, your websites, or where do you have these services listed? How do your students know they're available to them? Wherever you post that information, that's what you want to include here. If you have student satisfaction surveys, a lot of programs survey their students and ask them, are the services meeting your needs? A survey is not required, okay? It's not required, but if you do it and you're getting some information about how the services are meeting their needs, include that in your report. And then during the visit, there's going to be interviews again with the students, and they're going to ask them about what services are available and how are they meeting your needs. They're also going to meet with the student service personnel and ask them, what services do you provide? Okay. All right, in criterion 3.7, we're going to talk about learning and technology resources. Where else did we talk about learning and technology resources? Where else did we talk about learning and technology? 4. He gets an A. All right. Yeah, remember in standard 4, we talked about learning and technology resources. Okay. Remember in 4.3? Okay, y'all forgot about that already. All right, review your notes. There's a test on Friday. All right. So learning and technology resources for students are selected by the faculty and relevant to the educational level at which students are being prepared. All right. So first thing you need to do is identify what resources you have available. So just think right now, what resources are you using in your program? You probably have library resources. You probably have an LMS. You probably have some third-party vendor products. You might have ebooks. You may have lots of resources that come with the ebooks. You may have a testing platform. You probably have numerous learning and technology resources. So who decides what resources you have? The faculty decide that? Okay, so just explain how faculty selected those resources and how they're appropriate for the educational level. What's appropriate for a practical nursing student may not be appropriate for a graduate student. Okay, so just explain what you're using and how that meets your needs. If you're using a certain third-party vendor product for your BSN program, why'd you select that product? How does it meet your needs? All right, and then in B is where you want to talk about how students were oriented and how they receive support for the learning and technology resources. So maybe you have a week of orientation, first week of first semester, and all students get oriented to the learning management system. Maybe you have vendors come in and do orientation for your students every semester? Maybe there's tutorials posted online. Does your IT department, what type of support do they offer? Do students have 24-hour support if they have issues or problems? So you explain you orient your students and how they receive support. And then in 3.7C, how are they current and how are they accessible regardless of the location, method of delivery, or program option? So do all students get oriented to the resources? Do they all, no matter which program option they're in or what location they're in, do they all have access to IT support? All right, so in your narrative, you want to describe the process for orienting students to the resources, whether they be used in didactic, your lab resources, or your clinical learning environments. If students are using electronic health records in the hospital setting, who's orienting them to that? Does the hospital do that? Are you required to do that as a faculty member? How does it work? All right, and then you want to explain how the support services are available to students and how they access the support. Do they know there's an 800 number? Do they know there's a chat box or however they communicate? Explain that. And then how is currency maintained? Or do your ebooks automatically update every 5 years or every year? Or how does that work? You explain how your technology and how your resources are updated. In your library, is there a policy for updating your textbooks? Anybody still use a real library? A lot of places are converting to just online. But have you went in there and looked at the books that are in your library? Some of them may be really, really old. Do you have a weeding policy for your books? Because some things are outdated. So you might need to make a field trip to your library and just see what's there and what's accessible to students. And if your students are using the library, a lot of times I see them use it for study rooms, but they're usually accessing what they need electronically. All right, and then are there additional costs for learning and technology resources? Okay. Are there any costs for authenticating the student identity if you're using distance education? All right, and if you're supporting evidence, maybe you have agendas from your orientation. Maybe you have a packet that you give your students, some type of manuals that you give your students. Do you keep attendance records of who all was there the day the vendors came and did their orientation? What proof do you have that they were oriented to the products or technologies that you are using? All right, 3.8, 3.9, and 3.10 are all about the financial services that you offer your students. These may not apply to all of you. For example, some of you may not participate in federal student loans, so that wouldn't apply to you. Most of you participate in financial aid, Pell Grants, that sort of thing, okay? All right, so 3.8 is where you're gonna talk about how students are informed of their responsibilities regarding financial assistance. How do they know about this? A lot of times when students are admitted, they automatically get financial aid, information is sent to them, so you need to explain how they're informed of their responsibilities. In 3.9, that's where you're going to talk about your compliance with Title IV. What is your default rate? And most of everybody's been 0 for the past few years. But is there a plan to improve your federal default rate? If that applies to you, and it probably doesn't apply to anybody right now. And then in B, is there a written comprehensive federal student loan program addressing student loan information, counseling, and monitoring? And then in 3.10, does your federal financial aid record maintenance comply with federal guidelines? Now, some of your head may be about to explode. Listen to me. Nobody expects any of you to be a financial aid expert. Let me tell you what you need to do. You need to take criteria in 3.8, 3.9, and 3.10 to your federal aid representative at your program or college and have them help you with this. Because you probably don't know how those records are maintained because you don't have access and you've never seen them. That's okay. But it's important that you're compliant with those. So take these criteria to your financial aid representative. Schedule an appointment before you start writing your self-study report and tell them, I need to know this information. Jot down some notes, you write your narrative, and then send it back to them and let them read it. And then guess what? On site, during the visit, the peers are gonna meet with the financial aid representatives, and they're gonna ask them these questions. How are students counseled? How are students monitored? How do you keep your student records? So you can kind of prep them for the visit when you're meeting with them, okay? So don't be alarmed if you can't answer any of these right now. That's okay. What's important is that you know where to get the information. All right, so again, in your narrative, you want to describe the sources of financial assistance or financial aid that's available to your students, identify where the policies, where the repayment information, counseling, monitoring, where is all that located, or how do students get that information? Again, is there a plan in place if your default rates are 15% or greater? And then how are your records stored? Okay. Here's some supporting evidence examples, links to the website Most institutions have a financial aid tab or a section where students can go to receive financial aid information. Provide a link to that. If you have any paper files, brochures, pamphlets, or anything like that, you could include that. Any policies that they have for record maintenance, they may have a policy that they could send you that you could include in the repository. And then we have the website for the default rate. And then again, during the visit, there will be interviews. We have an exercise for Standard 3, but we're going to skip that exercise. You're welcome to do it on your own. You can look up your program's default rate for practice. However, it's been pretty flat since there's a pause, but now that those student loans have resumed, you might want to monitor your default rates in the coming years. But we'll take a moment. We have 9 minutes left. We kind of wanted to talk a little bit about a site visit. So very quickly reflect. What did you learn? What do you still have questions about with Standard 3? All right, how are we feeling about Standard 3? It's pretty straightforward, right? Yep. All right, so let's talk for a few minutes about how to prepare for a site visit. You all may have answered this already, but how many of you have site visits coming up in the next year? What about the next 2 years? A good many of you. Okay. All right, well, let's talk about how to prepare for a visit. All right, first of all, you want to plan ahead. This is not something you do last minute, okay? It takes some planning, and you want to begin as early as possible. And you all have done really good. You're here. So that tells me you're thinking about your site visit. You're the planners. You planned ahead. All right, you need to, we don't come and see you unless we're invited. So you got to submit that site visit request form. Listen, if you're due for a visit and we don't get a request form from you, we will hunt you down. No, you need to, and you've probably already done that. If your visit's in the next year, you've probably already submitted your request form, but you do need to request a visit. Now, there's a couple very important things that you'll include on that. One of those is, it'll ask you for like the nearest airport, and because most of your site visitors are going to be flying in. It's going to ask you for the nearest airport. It's going to ask you for the number of students and the number of faculty. But one very important thing is dates to avoid. Okay, you need to let us know what dates we don't need to come. If you have a 100th anniversary of your college celebration, we don't know that. You need to let us know, don't come that week. If you have midterm exams and that's just a terrible time, then list those dates because we don't want to come on those dates. So you tell us what dates to avoid. So you may need to look at your calendar, you may need to look at your college calendar, you may need to look at your administrator's calendar, but you need to let us know those dates because once they're set, it's really, really difficult or almost impossible to move a site visit team. All right, there is a site visit planning checklist that's available. It's in 2 places. It's on our website. It's actually on our website in 2 places, so you can find it on our website. Also, if you're here and you are the nurse administrator, in the repository, there is a folder that's titled Nurse Administrator Resources. In that Nurse Administrator Resources folder, there's also the site visit planning checklist there. That checklist will tell you exactly what you need to do at what time frame, okay? So it'll tell you 12 to 18 months, start writing your site visit report, and then it gets closer to the visit. 8 weeks out, 6 to 8 weeks out, what you need to be doing. 2 weeks out, what do you need to do? The week before, okay? Find that checklist if you're the nurse administrator. Even if you're not the nurse administrator, but you're the one that keeps the nurse administrator in order, get that checklist, okay? All right. Also, you want to make sure that you put this in your budget. Okay? Your financial representative, your CFO, or whatever they're called at your institution, CFO, sometimes they're nicer than others, right? But they don't like surprises, particularly big surprises. And this would be a huge surprise. So you want to make sure that you have budgetary support for your visit. Let them know this is coming and it's going to be an expense. Okay? All right, and then you want to develop a reasonable timeline. Really think about this. How long is it going to take us to get this report together? Because it takes some planning, right? You've listened to all 5 standards. Now you know what's involved in writing the report, right? You can't do this overnight. Probably can't even do this, and I wouldn't think you could do it in a week. It takes months sometimes to write this because it takes faculty involvement. You got to locate documents, that sort of thing. So plan ahead and develop a reasonable timeline for you. You know how much support you have. If you are one of 2 faculty or one of 4 faculty, it's going to be difficult. If you have 80 faculty, it's difficult, okay? It's just a lot to do. So think of what's reasonable for you and your program, considering your resources that are available. You want to get faculty engaged in the process. And I know sometimes that's easier said than done because everybody's busy, right? I've talked to a lot of you here that are faculty. Good for your program, your nurse administrator, for getting you here to the conference. I was sitting with some ladies at lunch that told me they try to send a few faculty, where are you at? A few faculty every time so that everybody gets to a conference. Well, good for you. That's getting your faculty engaged in the process. Help them understand the value of accreditation. Okay? Maximize your faculty strengths. You probably know who your organized one is, who your best writer is, who's really good with data collection, who keeps meticulous minutes. Okay, maximize those faculty strengths and then minimize those weaknesses. You know the one that just won't, the disorganized one. That's not the one you want to put in charge of your SPE or your self-study report, right? So minimize their weaknesses. Some folks may be challenged with writing, but they may be really good with technology. So they can organize that repository, but they cannot write a narrative, right? So minimize their weaknesses, but maximize their strengths. Encourage teamwork and collaboration. Okay, so get your faculty working together, maybe in small groups. Maybe you have various program options with faculty that don't know each other, never see each other. You get very different perspectives. When you're writing the 4.3 and you're talking about teaching strategies and instructional strategies and learning activities, pull in all these different options and have them work together so you get various perspectives. Use accreditation as a mentoring activity. If you have new faculty or even experienced faculty, this is a great way to mentor them. If you're here and you're the nurse administrator, maybe you've been through a couple site visits before. Mentor your new faculty. Help them feel comfortable with the process and help them understand the importance of the process. And then review the resources that are available as a team. I wouldn't do this in one day, but have you looked at our website at the resources? There's lots of resources that are available. I encourage you to visit our website multiple times to look at the resources. Pick some things that may be a team activity or some things that you can review together. Maybe you pick one standard a month and you review one standard a month. This month we're going to focus on standard 1. Next week, in the program guidelines, there are what we call focused questions. They're really good practice questions. They are not an all-inclusive list, of course, but it's definitely a start to get them to know the type of questions that may be asked during the visit. All right, so what are your resources? You've met 3 of the directors here, but we're available to answer any questions that you may have. We also have self-study forums, and then we have regional workshops. We have 2 more upcoming. We have one in July, August, and October. August and October. One is in Washington State, and the other one is in California. We'll be on the West Coast. So look for those if you live in the area, all about Standard 4 and Standard 5. All right, an advisory review is something that you might consider. Has anybody here had an advisory review? I see one hand. Okay, all right. So what an advisory review is, it's an optional service that we offer where you get one-on-one time with the director. So we do these either virtually or in person. It's less expensive to do them virtually, but you get director time. And generally what happens is, let's say you're concerned about Standard 4 or Standard 5. You would send your narrative draft to the director. They would give you feedback, and then they would meet with you virtually. You and your administrative team, you and your faculty. It's up to you. You'll work with that director to get that feedback, but it is one-on-one feedback that's specific to your program. If you have money in your budget, it's money well spent. It's a great service. You get some great feedback on your narrative. You also might consider being a peer evaluator. There is a pause right now on applications. However, we always need peer evaluators. So watch for that application to open back up probably in the fall. it's a great way to get hands-on experience to really get to know the standards and criteria. You meet people from all over and develop relationships with other nurse administrators, other faculty members, and it helps you be more comfortable with the accreditation process and the site visit process. We also have something called a site visit observer. That is something that you would need to apply for that, and then you would be placed, and a program would have to allow you to be an observer, but we would place you on a site visit. The program would have to agree to that, and then you would participate in all the meetings, have access to all the resources, but you wouldn't have to write to any of the standards. You would be, or your program would be responsible for all the cost. Okay, so you'd have to pay for your own flight, your own hotel, food, that sort of thing. And you can apply for that online if you're interested. There is an application, you have to do some training for that, and again, a program would have to agree to having an observer on site. All right, we also have the candidacy mentoring process. If you're in the candidacy process, you probably know who your mentor is, but take advantage of that mentor if you have questions or concerns regarding your site visit. And then we have publications. You can find these on the website, our annual report to constituents. And then we also have different director articles or webinars. I talked earlier about the position statement that regarding high stakes testing that's on the website. There's also, and I forgot to mention this yesterday, there's an upcoming position statement on clinical and practicum hours. So that should be coming out any day now. So you want to make sure and look for the latest and greatest information there from ACEN. And also our website, other resources that are available on the website. The 2023 program guidelines, I can't stress that enough. Review that document. It will tell you what, how to plan your agenda. There tell you how long each meeting should last, the purpose of the meeting. It'll has information there about writing your report. So it's just a lot of information in that document. So make sure that you download that and just save it to your desktop if you have an upcoming site visit. Also, you'll find the ACEN manual, and our policies are also located there. If you have a new college president or CEO that's not familiar with ACEN or may not be familiar with accreditation, give them the manual, give them the ACEN manual, give them a link to the ACEN website so they'll learn more about us, more about the accreditation process and the site visit process. All right, as far as your self-study report and the evidence, you want to describe your program, again, for the time of the visit, just like we've been talking about the past 2 days. You want to engage your stakeholders. Let your students know, hey, we're having an accreditation site visit. They're going to talk to you. They're going to ask you some questions. Give them those sample questions, the focus questions I talked about in the program guidelines, just so they're not terrified and feel comfortable with the visit. Let your advisory committee members know about the visit and their importance. Their feedback is important during the visit. Graduates, clinical affiliates, and your agency liaisons, let them know that there's going to be an interview. There's going to be an upcoming interview, and you'd really like for them to be there. It's really important for them to be there. Sometimes just give them a little prep. I'm going to be sending you a meeting invite. I'd really like for you to come. Let them know who ACEN is and the importance of ACEN. And then your support services, like I just mentioned, the financial aid representatives, let them know. Let them know that there's going to be a site visit. They're going to ask you some questions, so prep them for the visit as well, and your administrative personnel. All right, about the writing. You want to divide the writing and the exhibits up and distribute sections of your site visit report. The last thing you want is your site visit team to show up and ask questions and your faculty just sit there like, because the nurse administrator wrote the entire thing, or a consultant wrote the entire thing, and the faculty don't have a clue. They've never looked at it, they've never seen your SPE. That's not good. They need to be able to talk about the plan. They need to be involved in writing the self-study report. Okay, so get them involved. Break it up into sections if you have enough individuals. If you only have 2 faculty, well, you both may have to work on that. But if you have large enough faculty, distribute sections of it. All right, assign editing and proofreading tasks to make it one voice. Going back to your faculty strengths, you know who your best writers are. You want your report, it's okay if different people write your report, but you want it to read in one voice. Remember yesterday I talked about your end of program student learning outcomes? If you don't call them that, call them what you call them. Well, you want to make sure if you call them program outcomes, that you've called them program outcomes throughout your report. So get somebody to put it in one voice so that consistent terminology is used throughout the report. You also want to consider using a collaborative writing platform, Teams, Word, something like that, so everybody can work together maybe. And then set a deadline. Set a deadline for the draft. Make it realistic so that they can continue doing their other work. You still got your day-to-day stuff going on. Everybody still has their day-to-day responsibilities. You have students, you have clinical, you have meetings. Life goes on in addition to planning for this visit. So be realistic with your timeline and the responsibilities that you and others have. Consider having an outside review of the draft. We used to always send ours to the English department. We'd let them know ahead of time, we're gonna have this to you about 2 months before it's due, if you'll just proof this. Because, you know, they're not so married to the policies and the Department of Nursing that some things just stick out to them. They notice things that we know it, so we think it reads right, but they'll be like, no, this don't read right. You need to clarify this a little better. So consider getting an outside review of the draft. And if you have access to the English department or whoever at your college that can do that, generally it's free. Okay. All right, and then you want to allow time to assemble and upload the non-confidential evidence. Okay, so remember, anything that's confidential you don't want to put in the repository. Please don't upload any health records of any student or any faculty in there. Any transcripts that have date of birth, home address, social security numbers, don't upload any of that. Okay, only non-confidential information. Everything that's confidential can be looked at on site. Okay, so, but you do need to upload all the evidence that we've been talking about the past couple days in the repository, and that takes time. It takes time to gather it, and then it takes time to organize it and get it uploaded into the repository. So what you may want to do is determine a central place where you want to store the evidence. Maybe you have a shared drive that you use. I'm fixing to show you an example of like how to build folders, but you might want to build your folders just like you're going to build your repository. But maybe have a shared place. Maybe you have an ongoing list of documents that you still need. Like, I know I need 3 years of meeting minutes, so I'm still looking for those October 23 minute meetings. So, you know, maybe you have a list of what you need to gather. And then collect the evidence and organize it as you write. If you're writing 4.1, start collecting what evidence you may need for 4.1. If you're writing 4.2, what evidence do I need for 4.2? You have a list in your all the slides that you've been given here of what you need. So you have a good start on it. And then you want to organize your evidence as you write and consider how you label it. Be very consistent with you. This goes back to knowing your faculty strengths. You really want to find somebody who's very organized to do your repository. And I cannot stress that enough. But you also want to use a standard naming convention so that if you're working with standard 1 and you're in criterion 1.1, maybe you label your evidence 1.1A. And then your next document would be 1.1B. And then what is it? Mission, vision, whatever, label what it is. 4.2, curriculum map. 4.2.2, additional curriculum map. You know, give it a title and a naming convention that works, and it's easy to understand. And then as you're writing your self-study report, refer your reader. This is a table representing the concept map. The full document can be found in the repository, table 4.2.2. Does that make sense? Okay. All right, and then you want to upload your report, and the evidence must be there 6 weeks prior to the visit. The repository will lock. When you get your team, you'll get what's called a team letter. The nurse administrator will get a team letter. And that team letter, we'll call it a team letter, but it includes all your all members of the site visit team and their contact information, as well as the due date for your repository. And it'll tell you it's due to the repository by August the 16th, 2025, or whatever your date is, okay? But you have until 6 weeks before the visit. All right, this is what the repository will look like when you log in. And repository access is given to the nurse administrator. We only give one per program. No, we can't make an exception for you. We give one per program, but the nurse administrator can delegate that. Okay, so she can give access to, or he can give access to whoever, but we only give one access. All right, so when you log in, there will be this, we call it 01 folder, written report and supporting evidence. There will also be the nurse administrator resources folder will also be there. But the one we're going to talk about right now is the written report and supporting evidence. So when you see that folder, do you see up at the top where it says up? Oh, sorry. Do what? You have a question? No? Okay. All right. So up towards the top there, do you see where it says upload or new folder? And so you can add to this. So let's look at what we want to add to our 01 folder. We want to open up that 01 folder, and inside it, this is what I should see on every one of you if I come for a visit. I want to see a folder for your course syllabi, a folder for your supporting evidence, and then you want to add your faculty profile table, your self-study report, and your SPE. Do y'all have these slides? You do? Okay, all right. So those 5 things right there should be what I see, okay? We're still real organized right now, right? I can see exactly what's there. All right, let's look inside the folder. This is inside the supporting evidence folder. So you see that first folder is my catalogs, handbooks, and manuals. I'm putting them all in one place. Why am I putting all those in one place? because all members of the site visit team are gonna need to look at those. Don't bury them down there in 3.2, where if I'm writing the standard 4, I can't find them. Put them in a central location. Remember, the evaluation review panel and the board of commissioners are also gonna look at your repository, and you wanna make it easy for them to look at as well. Don't make people have to dig to find information, okay? So catalogs, handbooks, and manuals has a folder. External agency documentation, you may or may not have that folder. It's typically like approval letters from your state board or something like that. Meeting minutes, very important folder. We're gonna look inside that folder in just a minute. And then do you see how we have a folder for every one of the standards? You will have evidence for every one of the standards. All right, let's look at the meeting minute folder. So I'm gonna open up that meeting minute folder and then I'm gonna add to it, right? At this particular program, these are the only meeting minutes I have, or committee meeting minutes that I have. I have a curriculum committee, I have a faculty committee, and then I have a program evaluation committee. You may have an advisory committee, you may have an ad hoc committee, you may have a testing committee. You could have 15, 20 different committees. Put them in here, give them a folder. If you reference meeting minutes anywhere in your report, give them a folder. And I don't have once I open the curriculum committee, then organize them by date. You could have subfolders there for a folder for 23, a folder for 24, and a folder for 25. You see what I'm talking about? Very organized there. So that when you refer to a certain set of meeting minutes in your report, I know exactly which set of meeting minutes to go look to. If you know an important decision was made in December of 24 and you reference that in Standard 5 and you talked about the December of 24 faculty meeting minutes, I know to go to the faculty meeting minutes December of 24 and find what you're talking about, okay? All right, and then remember each of your standards had a folder. So you want to build a folder for each of your criteria that you have evidence for. What if for criterion 1.1, I don't have any evidence to upload? I put it all in the narrative. Then don't build a folder. Don't make empty folders, okay? Only build a folder for the criteria. And most criteria are going to have something, but occasionally you may have one that doesn't. And you see where 1.4, 1.5, and 1.6 is combined? That's okay, because however the document was made at this particular place, it answered all the questions I needed to, so I could combine those. All right, that's the repository. This is not too bad, is it? You just got to get that folder structure right. So you might want to build your folder structure out before you start uploading evidence. What a lot of folks do is will have I may have already said this, a shared document, or they may use their LMS and build like a mock repository. And then all you have to do is move the evidence over 6 weeks before the visit, okay? All right, so, did I go too far? Okay, all right, so again, you want to review the resources that are available in the repository. I talked about that nurse administrator planning list. There's also an agenda template that's located in that resources folder. So you want to make sure and use that template. You don't have to, but it's a nice template that'll really help you. All right, and then plan the agenda with the team chair. Typically, the team chair is going to reach out about 8 weeks ahead of time. If you don't hear from the team chair, and it's about 6 weeks before your visit, remember that team letter I was talking about? You have their contact information, so you reach out to them. And you would email them the agenda draft, and you two would work together to develop and finalize the agenda, okay? If you've reached out to your team chair a couple times and haven't heard back from them, you need to let us know so we can figure out what's going on. All right, get on your interviewees' calendars early. Your college president, CEO, their calendar probably fills up really quick. As soon as you have that agenda set, let them know so that they can block time. We talked about the support services personnel meeting. You're gonna talk to your financial aid representative, the librarian, any counselors or advisors. You gotta get on all these calendars, okay? So as soon as your calendar's finalized, get on their calendar so that they can make sure they're in attendance. You also wanna reserve meeting rooms and times based on the agenda. You know what space is like at your institution. It may be really tight and hard to get space. So you wanna go ahead and reserve rooms because they gotta sit and work somewhere. Okay, they're gonna need a workroom and you're gonna need a meeting room to have all these meetings during the visit. And then plan lunch each day. The site visit, particularly the first day, it's really busy and it's a lot of work. They don't have time to leave for lunch. They usually will have a working lunch. If you have, it's nice if you can provide a really light lunch for them. It's not required. You'll work this out with the team chair, but if you can provide a light lunch, some water, snacks for them to have as they work. You don't want a hangry peer evaluator, do you? No. So work this out with the team chair and just let them know what to expect. If you have a cafeteria on site, I've had them walk me to the cafeteria and we get lunch there. I've also had them bring food from the cafeteria to us. It works, but you'll talk with your team chair and just let them know what the plan is for lunch each day. You also want to make sure you have a place for them to stay. You know what hotel space is like in your area. So you want to reserve a hotel room for each team member. Typically there's 3. If you have one program, if you have just an associate program, just a practical nursing program, typically it's 3 visitors. If you have an associate program, a practical nursing program, you're gonna have 4 site visitors, typically. Okay, so you can plan if you're a single program type, at least 3 site visitors. All right, you wanna confirm travel or departure dates based on flights. Usually the team chair will get with the other team members and everybody will try to arrive at the same time so that you can make one pickup. You personally don't have to pick them up. You can hire a service, send an Uber or something. I've been picked up by the maintenance person. I've been picked up by faculty. And so it varies place to place. You know who your best drivers are and you know who has the biggest vehicles that can get all those suitcases and stuff in there. So plan transportation during the visit. Remember, you got to pick them up at the airport. You got to pick them up at the hotel every morning. You got to drop them off at the airport. And if you have different campuses, you got to get them around to the different campuses. So plan transportation. And don't forget to post your public meeting. Everyone's required to have a public meeting. So you want that posted at least 6 weeks ahead of time. They're going to need a place to work when they're on site. So make sure that you have a room where everybody has a charger for their laptop. Yeah, every program's required to have a public meeting. A public meeting where members of the public can come and give their opinion about your nursing program. Yeah, during the visit. It's part of the site visit, a public meeting. Yes, you will be required to host a public meeting and also a call for public comments regarding your program at least 6 weeks beforehand. It's okay if nobody comes. I've been to programs where nobody showed up, and then I've been where 40-something folks showed up. It just varies. How long? Oh, usually 30, 45 minutes is plenty of time. I forget the exact requirement. It's on the agenda. If you look up the meeting in the program guidelines, it'll tell you how long to plan for it. I cannot remember. The 30 minutes is sticking out for some reason. All right, so you need a workroom that's large enough to accommodate the team, close to the nursing department. Look, don't put your site visitors way over there at the other side of the campus and the nursing program is way over here, because getting them back and forth to all the meetings is a logistical nightmare, and they're going to have questions or they're going to need things, and you're way over there. Okay, so don't do that to your team. You want to make sure that they have internet access, basic office supplies, water, light snacks. Remember, they traveled, so they couldn't fly with liquids and things like that. All right, so how to prepare your participants. You might have a mock visit, okay? You've got a lot of knowledge over the past 2 days, so you could go home and have a mock visit. It might be fun. You could also involve all the parties, that your chancellor, your president, your administrative staff, your student support services, students. So get everybody involved. And again, reinforce the focus and the purpose of the visit. Give them all a copy of the self-study report. It's electronic, right? So share that with your college president. Share that with your student support personnel. Share that with your communities of interest, with your advisory board. And again, that last bullet point is about those focused questions. That'll really help them to feel more comfortable answering questions. All right, what do you do during the visit? All right, what to do during the visit? Have someone available to assist the site visit team. Communicate with the team. They're going to have questions. They're going to have needs. So make sure that you stay in communication. Again, don't go hide. This is not joint commission. Don't go hide in the bathroom for the entire visit, okay? Talk to the folks. Have your student faculty files available or someone to assist them. So maybe your faculty files are kept by HR. Talk with HR. Tell them you need to get on their agenda, that they're going to need to meet for an hour, 2 hours, depends on how many faculty files you have to review, but just let them know that they need to review those. Your student files, maybe you have a representative to help them with the student files. Some folks just bring all the files and just set them in the workroom, and you just work on them when you can get to them. But they will need an escort. Remember, they don't know their way around your campus. Usually they figure it out by the end of day 2, sort of. But you need somebody to help them get from meeting to meeting, particularly if one's in this building, one's in that building, another one's in that building. It's real helpful if you have one meeting space where all the meetings are. That's not always possible, though. All right, this is a really important slide. What do you do after the visit? Let's say you had your visit and everything went really well, but the team found a couple areas where they couldn't verify compliance. Let me back up a step. The site visit team, they're going to review all the standards and all the criteria, and let's say that they're going to review all your standards and criteria, and they have 2 decisions they can make. They'll either be able to verify compliance with the criteria, or they'll be unable to verify compliance. Okay? That's not saying you're non-compliant. It's just saying at the time of the visit, they could not verify compliance. Okay? They'll tell you that typically when they leave. All right, so they will leave. So you know right then, oh, I have those 2 areas where they couldn't verify compliance. You need to get busy working on those areas. Okay? Because 1 week after the visit, you're going to get a survey. But then 8 weeks after the visit, you're going to get your final site visit report. And you're going to get what's called a program response form. And with that program response form, you'll get the instructions of how to complete it, but you will respond to any errors in fact and provide any additional evidence. So let's say that they were unable to verify compliance with 4.2. Let's say that you did not have your course learning outcomes mapped, right? Or you didn't have any proof that your course objectives progress. But since the visit, you've been working on that. Now you have a beautiful document. You worked on your course learning outcomes. They now progress to your end of program student learning outcomes. So in your response, you would provide that update, provide that additional information. Okay? When you submit that additional, you have 1 month to provide your response. When you provide that additional information, you'll put it in the repository. And what will happen is when your program is reviewed by the evaluation review panel and the Board of Commissioners, they are going to look at your self-study report, the team's site visit report, and your additional information that you provided in your response. Okay, and they will use that in their decision making, because the evaluation review panel is who's going to make the recommendation to the board for continuing accreditation, or continuing accreditation with conditions if it's still non-compliant, or maybe it's initial accreditation. Okay, so you have your site visit. A week after your site visit, you're going to get a survey. 8 weeks, or about 8 weeks after your visit, you're going to get your final site visit report. You need to go through that final site visit report with a fine-tooth comb. You're looking for errors in fact. Maybe I spelled your name wrong. Maybe I called the campus the wrong name. Maybe I got your credit hours wrong on the table that I had to fill out. So make any errors in fact, address that in your response. But oh, here's these 2 areas where they couldn't verify compliance while they were here. So I've been working on that and now I have a response. So just explain. You might need to do a new narrative. At the time of the visit, we weren't compliant with 4.2. This is what we've done since the visit. And then provide whatever evidence you have that you have made changes, revisions, whatever you've done since the visit. Okay? And then all that additional evidence is going to be available for the evaluation review panel and the board. Are y'all with me? Does that process?
So after this response for 8 weeks, you said something about you had the last month?
Yes. So when you get your report 8 weeks, that 8 weeks after the visit, when you get your final site visit report and you get the response form with the instructions, you have 1 month to provide that response. And you'll place that response in the repository. So don't wait 8 weeks. When the team leaves, if they tell you they're unable to verify compliance, start working because you have that 8 weeks. Start working and start planning. And then once you get your report, you have an additional month. Okay? And then that additional evidence will be available for the evaluation review panel and the board, so that when they'll have it to make a recommendation, and then of course the board will make the final decision. Okay? You'll get information about what to do with the response form when you get your final report. You'll get the instructions. All right, how to maintain ACEN accreditation. Submission of your annual report. Report any substantive changes. That's policy number 14. And then you want to stay up to date with the standards and criteria. Remember, they're updated every 5 years. Here are some helpful links. I talked about that site visit request form submission. There's a link for that. The site visit planning checklist, the link is there. Program guidelines, and then the resource center. All right. Remember our desired learning outcome from yesterday? The 100% of you would identify at least one expected change. So how do we do? Did you identify at least one way that you're going to change or enhance your program? Probably a lot more than one. All right, what questions do you have? I know y'all are tired. Laura, Carrie, do you have anything? Oh, you have a question, I'm sorry.
I do. Our self-study is due in January, but our visit is March. But sometime over this summer, before September, my role will change, okay? I'll become a mentor to the then new nurse administrator, and that would require substantive change, well aware of that. My question is, during the site visit, when I know from the last visit we had, we were constantly meeting with the visitors as the administrator. Is it possible to be there with the administrator at the time?
You're still gonna be like in a mentor role?
Yes.
Yeah, it's not uncommon, and you'll talk to your team chair about that as well, and just let them know your role and that you have a new nurse administrator. It can be very intimidating if you have a brand new nurse administrator to go through a site visit. So yes, that is reasonable. Also during a site visit, if you are the nurse administrator, but you have like maybe a director or an assistant director or somebody that works very closely with you, a lot of times they will also be allowed to attend you'll have a meeting with your team as the nurse administrator every morning of the visit and at the end of every visit day. So talk to your team chair and those folks can also attend. Now, obviously everybody can attend those meetings, but your nurse administrator, if there is an assistant administrator, welcome to come to the meeting. All right, well, if there's no other questions, I know I'll see some of you tomorrow, but thank you all for attending, and safe travels to you all.
La convocatoria, creo, y a veces no termina porque nosotros cuando entramos era la de los otros señores que estaban, que los corrieron, no sé por qué. Sí. Luego llegaron ustedes y ustedes se quedaron más tiempo. Más tiempo. Porque la universidad pues no se podía. Tiene que ser por medio de la compañía. Nada más que Mónica dijo, tú vas a hacer unos y otros. Y ellas se fueron a los ranchitos y yo me quedé. Yo los florines allí en los baños. Ahorita digo, Mónica, tráeme unos desodorantes porque el baño que no tienen yo. ¿Qué marca? Y que dejan. Siempre les va, pero no estás de acuerdo cuando te regresaron ahí que el baño. No sé qué le hicieron, si fueron nomás que ustedes. No, le limpié, le quité todo lo negro que tenía. Eso fue, y aquellos también. Y también aquel baño estaba igual. Porque también allá en el edificio del medio, el que sigue, tiene unos baños muy pequeños. Y vamos a estar, pero la casa no está tan fea, digo, pero ¿y eso digo? Me parece que se fea mucho. Aquí este baño de mujeres, si muevas una puerta, parece que no se ve. Sí, pero yo ya lo tallé, no se me quita. No, yo los tallé con una telita bien, así esa de hierro y no se me quitó. Mojo. Hongo, pero no es. No, porque ya le echamos, nosotros le echamos. Porque se ve así, mira. Sí, sí se ve. Ese es hongo. Ese es hongo. Sí, no, y ese es hongo. Bueno, en lo de esta yo nunca había vivido, es que yo había vivido en el paso.
Pero
No,
dice
esta
que
no.
vive con su familia.
Sí, estaba con mi hija. Pero no sé si se quiera quedar allí o se quiera mover, porque dijo que a lo mejor se quería mover a otro pueblito que está en Carver, que le queda lo mismo de distancia al esposo del trabajo. Entonces a él también le gustó allá, ya sí tiene familiares. Él, entonces dijo que no sé, a ver si se le decía contrato del departamento y rentar allá, él quiere una casa. Y a ver, y le queda la misma distancia. Digo, a ver, ¿qué le quiere? Pero
¿Tiene nietos?
dos,
Allá cerca.
no,
Aquí.
con mi hija, tengo dos, pero no, y mi nieto, tengo otros dos que están en México. Y él, yo no tengo familiares. El esposo de mi hija tiene familiares en Carmen y en
Tiene libre.
ya me voy porque ya tocaron el nivel cada tres.
Ay, sí, sí, sí.
Sí.
Ay, bueno.
Ándale, pues me dio gusto saludarte y bueno, cada vez están aquí. Yo voy a venir lunes, martes, miércoles, viernes, Mónica y jueves siguiente vengo yo.
Oh, okay, sí, so mi contrato acaba el 22 de este mes.
Ah.
So voy a estar aquí 2 semanas. Voy a tratar de venir para prepararme para el luego espanto yo a Mónica porque aquí ando en mis puras. ¿Qué se ve? So they won't look espanted, a ver.
Pero oscuras.
Sí, a oscuras.
Como el otro muchacho de Cata
I mean, it's 2 days office, 3 days out,
Oh, that's
so,
How nice.
yep. And it's government, so,
Oh, oh yeah, you're good.
Department of Defense,
You're good.
so.
You got retirement and everything built in. Yep.
So. Mhm. I know. But if you need anything before then, let me know.
Tomorrow.
Yes, right, cause if I don't fix it by tomorrow, you get the rest of IT,
Oh no.
so.
Oh god. We're gonna miss you. We're gonna miss you. Bitch.
Yeah.
Are you sure you have to leave?
It's real, yeah, so,
We'll look out for you.
thanks.